Welcome into Hot Mics, Live Cameras, Jason Staples in full character. This is The Game Plan, sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. My bad, Jason. I'm going to get you in here first so you can set the record straight. I think this game might have some relevance to your livelihood. Carolina goes to Florida State on Saturday at 3:30 on the ACC Network. You get the opening thoughts here.
Well, the opening thoughts are that this would ordinarily be a really fun week, an opportunity to see, my two alma maters, my, two programs that I really have spent a lot of time covering the last 15 years and a lot of familiarity with over the last 20. And, ordinarily it would be like I said, a fun week and a chance to really get a chance to break down some fun stuff. But there's not been a whole lot of fun on either side this season, and I don't think we're going to see the highest of high level, playoff level football in Tallahassee this week. So yeah, and it's a very different game than I think we expected to see at the beginning of the season as well. I mean, I think most folks, whether in Tallahassee or in the national media, expected this Florida State team to, not be as good as last year's team. I don't think anybody thought that, but to be a legitimate playoff contender. And, they've been, I don't think there's a whole lot of argument. They've been the worst offense in the Power 5 or Power 4, Power 3, whatever it is now. And now we're in a position where, Carolina is coming in as a favorite, should be the favorite, but Florida State's still a dangerous team and still has a lot of weapons and a lot of bodies on defense. Not a whole lot of weapons on offense, but enough players to present the problem. And we've seen Mack Brown teams before be favored against Florida State and sort of faceplant. And we'll see whether that trend continues or whether Florida State's trend towards a program low since the early 1970s continues.
Greg, I saw tickets on one of the secondary markets like $15 to go see this game, and we thought it would, like Jason said, we thought it was going to be a big one when the season started. But to Jason's last point there, Carolina, if my math is correct, in the last two games combined, Carolina was 31.5-point favorites, and they lost both of them. Greg, is this the Carolina team that's built to handle business? And we'll get into the nuts and bolts of it. But do you think this is the team that can stack a performance on top of Virginia and go down to Florida State and handle it?
It's the question, right, Tommy, of we saw against Virginia what North Carolina could be, what we thought they would be to start the season. And that's part of the frustrating aspect of things is they looked good offensively. They were solid enough defensively. That's a team that probably is not playing in the ACC championship game, but they're contending. They're competing for it. And we just have not seen really that type of performance. Minnesota, Virginia are different types of games in what we've seen out of this North Carolina team. And yet you look at the odds of this game, Carolina's favored by 2.5. And people say, well, how in the world is Carolina only favored by 2.5? Well, look, one thing that we've talked about dating back to January when the schedules were released, Carolina's schedule is a cakewalk. It was in January. It was in August. Now that we're past the halfway point of the season, it has been. Some teams have been better than we thought. Other teams have been worse than we thought. But to date, Carolina's strength of schedule ranks 79th nationally. Florida State's 15th. So, yeah, Florida State has struggled. They've lost pretty much all of their games, but they've been competitive in a lot of them. And they've had some tough games. Carolina really has not. And then you add in a game like James Madison when they kind of get embarrassed at home. And you just have a kind of a lot of doubts. But I think one thing that we talked about coming into the game last week is that if Carolina did what they were supposed to do, and they didn't have a lot of the silly mistakes that we'd seen in previous weeks, that they could beat Virginia, maybe even handily. Now, I don't think anybody thought Carolina would beat Virginia to the extent that they did. But that kind of shows you the potential of the team. Now, to your point, is this a Carolina team that can replicate that? We have not really seen that, so there's a lot of question marks about that. But we know why Carolina is favored, and it's just a matter of can they play to that level 1 week later.
Jason, first of all, yeah, y'all go ahead and write down your score predictions because we're not going to meet our contractually obligated hour tonight. People are on sugar highs and everything else high from Halloween trick-or-treating. If you're watching this, hope your family and your folks and everybody had a safe Halloween here, and shout out to the folks that are listening all over the state. Jason, North Carolina's got good performances. They can look and say, hey, we can do this. I'm not sure Florida State does this season. 1-7. Georgia Tech game was fairly close. Probably should have won Duke game, but they got a gift by a missed field goal in the Cal game that could have resulted in that very last drive by Cal being a game-winning field goal. Does that give Carolina fans reason to be confident that Carolina has at least shown the potential, whereas the other team across the ball has not?
Yeah, I think it has to. It gets back to, and y'all can drink for my bringing in another sport comparison here. But if you've got two guys in major competition, in a major, in contention, in golf, one guy has won 2 majors in the last 4 years, and the other guy has never won a major. They're tied with 4 holes to play. Who's your money on, Greg Barnes?
I'm going with the guy who's had the success previously.
So, yeah, I mean, if you've had 2 teams that have played roughly the same level of ball, and one team has managed to find ways to win at different points during that season, and the other keeps finding ways to just let it slip through their fingers, and literally with Florida State, that's been arguably the biggest problem they've had, is major catastrophic drops from their tight ends, wide receivers, and even running backs. But just they've found every possible way when in position to make a game-changing, potentially game-winning play, not to make that play. Carolina's had multiple situations where guys have actually stepped up and made that play. Well, I mean, if you're going to be looking at that, you ask, is there any reason to have, a little bit more confidence that, that you can get it done there? Well, yeah, that's your reason right there.
Greg, looking at it, and Sean Crawley, and shout out to Sean, he's always in these chats, but I'll throw it up here. If you're Carolina, you have to jump out early and make Florida State uninterested, or here we go again, attitude. I'm not 100% sure Florida State's played that way. I think they still play hard. Jason can pontificate on that in a second, but Greg, fast starts for North Carolina have been hit or miss. We've seen it, and we've seen the opposite on the defensive side as well. But if you're Chip Lindsey in the offense and you're Geoff Collins in the defense, what's the game plan early? Is it go get them right away? I mean, how does Carolina approach it, you think?
Well, look, I think the point of his question is spot on, and it's that there's a lot of frail egos in play with this game on both sides of the ball. Carolina, kind of, as you mentioned, has kind of been hit or miss with how games have started, but they started very well against Virginia. And when you can have some success early, that builds the confidence. And I think what people need to understand is that really good teams know that they're good, and it really doesn't matter how they start. Yeah, you want to start well every week, but if you know that you're good, it's okay if you have a bad first quarter because there's no question that you can bounce back and close strong. But the way that these two teams have played this year, like off the bat starts like, like, are we able to bounce back? Can we do this? Are we sure we can do this? And that's a problem, and that speaks to kind of the frail ego aspect of things. So I do lend some credence to that, just because the confidence is not where it needs to be with either of these teams, and you need to have trust in yourself. So any bit of success that you can have early helps, and especially for North Carolina. If you look at the Virginia game, when you've got somebody like Omarion Hampton that you can just lean on, especially if you have a lead, that makes your game plan much simpler, and that makes Chip Lindsey's job much simpler. And then you add in the fact that defensively they played solid enough against Virginia. It becomes a pretty easy game plan, and that's the kind of game plan that I like, where you can lean on your defense and run the ball. And hey, it's like we're the Steelers from the 1970s. But I think what Chip Lindsey needs to do, though, it's not a matter of getting cute and trying to force the issue early. It's capitalizing on the opportunities that you have, because there's going to be opportunities. One of the unique things about this game, Tommy, is that it's strength versus strength, weakness versus weakness. And so I really think that North Carolina, if they can have a little bit of success offensively, that's going to make it so much more easy for the defense to be able to get some stops. And we, as Jason said, this Florida State offense has really struggled. And now that DJ's banged up, even more so. But just look, we know where North Carolina's strength is Hampton. And so you want to be able to have a balanced attack, but you want to be able to lean on him and let him put you in the scoring zone. And even if you just get a couple field goals early, you put some stress on that Florida State offense to have to score, and then you feel pretty confident about your options.
Yeah, and just to stay about to build on that about Florida State's offense putting pressure on them. Florida State's offense has scored over 20 points one time this season.
That's incredible.
And that was 21 points in the opener against Georgia Tech. They have not scored over 20 points since the opener against Georgia Tech. So if you score a touchdown against them, it feels to Florida State right now like they just gave up 3 scores. Because for them, scoring a touchdown is, it's just an unknown phenomenon right now. They do not finish drives. They have not hit big plays. They've had a lot of opportunities for big plays, and it has just been. I've never in my life watched a team so consistently have opportunities for quarterback just put that right on the money on a deep post route, and finally somebody's running open. All right, there's your touch, and that's when the guy drops it. Or, there's a seam route. All right, good to go. Oh, quarterback put it in there. Good. Drop. All right. Oh, quarterback hums it in there. Oh, wrong route. Or miscommunication. That one's a pick. It should have been a touchdown because the guy was running wide open, but the quarterback threw to this spot, not that spot. And it is a comedy of errors on their offense right now, where the joke among the Florida State folks right now, and they're at the point where you kind of have to joke about it, because among fans you kind of have to joke about it, because otherwise you're just going to be constantly bitter and frustrated all the time. So the joke among fans is that basically when Florida State huddles, they're drawing straws on offense to see who gets to screw up that play. Like, okay, 10 of us get to do this right. Who's going to be the one to totally lay an egg on this play? That's basically where things are at with them. So yeah, you score 10 points in the first quarter, and that's like scoring 24 points in the first quarter against just about anybody else you're going to play right now. So, putting early pressure on Florida State by scoring by scoring points is a major deal.
So stay right here, Jason, and Greg then followed Jason on this. What is Carolina's approach on defense? We'll start there to prevent Florida State from finally figuring it out. I mean, if it's a drop issue, I believe I looked, they had 24 drops on the season. Your tight end Morlock has 4 or credited for 4.
Yeah, he's credited for 4. He has about 7.
And so what does Carolina's defensive approach look like to make sure that Saturday's not the time Florida State just, rides the lightning on offense?
I mean, to some degree, I don't think there's a specific special thing you do. I don't think anybody has done anything special against Florida State this year to force those turnovers or to force those mistakes. I mean, it's like tennis where you hear people talk about unforced errors. There's been a lot of that where it's not been a matter of stuff being forced. It's this play, the quarterback has plenty of time. Everything else goes right, and that's when it's dropped. But the biggest thing, I think, is you've got to continue to force Florida State to be maybe the worst rushing offense in college football, which is wild because that's the thing that Mike Norvell offenses have historically been really good running the football. That was his calling card coming into the season, was no matter what, Mike Norvell's teams are always going to be able to run the football. Florida State this year has the worst rush offense in the Power 5 and one of the worst rush offenses in the country. In fact, I'm looking it up right now. Rushing offense, average yards per carry. That would be rushing defense, so that doesn't help me. But rushing offense, average yards per carry against Power 5 competition. All right, so we're just going to narrow it down to that. Florida State they're down toward the bottom. They're 100th in 2.96 yards per carry on the season. So project number 1 is don't give Florida State anything easy. I think that's the biggest thing. This is a team that has struggled to do the easy things. Don't make it easy on them by losing gap control, by giving them a lane, because all of a sudden you get a back that gets out in the open field and runs for 60. That offense starts to go, oh, look what we did. That happened. And now maybe, play action feels a little different. I mean, so much of, I think, what's happened down there is, the offense that we've seen the rest of the year has not looked like the offense that played the first half against Georgia Tech, which actually moved the ball pretty well, ran the ball fine, all of that. But when things started going wrong, they never figured out. There's not been one guy in that locker room on the offensive side who has stepped up and said, all right, guys, I got this. Let's just get this fixed. And stepped up and done like Omari and Hampton. If you're North Carolina and things are not going well on offense, at a certain point, if you're the offensive coordinator, you just say, okay, let's just give it to that guy. Let's give it to 28 and let him get a few positive plays. And that sort of gets you back on track. They've had none of that. So the last thing you want to do is give them a little bit of hope by if they're rushing for 4 yards a carry, 4.5 yards a carry in the first half, that opens certain things up. You start to get a little flow in your offense. Receivers start to feel like, we're moving a little bit, and, receivers are head cases at all times anyway, no matter what. I should know. And maybe that helps get guys catching the football, that you feel a little bit of momentum. You can't let that happen. If you can keep them from running the ball, the other thing is I'm going to give you pressure rate on the season, okay? In terms of defensive pressure rate, the number 1 defense in the ACC this season is Miami of Florida at 45%. They pressure the passer on 45% of dropbacks, which is among the best numbers in the country, okay? Florida State, on offense, pressure rate given up is 44.2%.
That's so.
Florida State's offense has essentially, and actually I'm curious now, I'm gonna open this up. If you were looking at this nationally for pressure rate, defense, Miami's number one in the nation. Okay, so number one in the nation at 45.0. The number two pressure rate in the country is SMU, who's also helped beef up their pressure rate by playing Florida State, but 42.9%. Florida State's offensive pressure rate, if it were a defense, would be number two in the country. The pressure rate that their offense gives up. So the defense that plays Florida State every week has been the number two pressure defense in the country in terms of quarterback pressures. Stop the run and then turn Rucker and that bunch out there on the defensive line loose, get some pressure on the quarterback, and Florida State has had no answers because they've not been able to run the football and they've not been able to protect the quarterback. And when they do get enough time to throw, they drop the football. So the main thing, don't let them run the football and keep getting pressure on them.
Sounds like a plan. Greg.
Yes, don't take the bait. Don't take the bait. Here's the thing. Jason is exactly right. Everything he laid out, as you would expect, is spot on. Do not take the bait, Geoff Collins. So look, when you look at what Florida State has done, they have been a disaster, right? I mean, they've allowed 23 sacks, which is 14th in the ACC, over 50 tackles for loss. They are ripe for the picking. However, we know what this North Carolina defense has done. And Jason hit on something there that I think is very important. Do not breathe life into that offense. Because if you look at what Florida State has done offensively, they rank 124th nationally in available yards percentage, right? So basically, if they start at the 20 and they're trying to get to the end zone, what percentage of those 80 yards do they get on a possession, right? They're at 34%, which is horrendous. They're not getting anything, okay? And then if we take a step back and we look at, okay, well, what about 20-yard plays? Florida State ranks tied for 125th nationally with 25 20-plus yard plays.
How many of those in the opener, by the way?
I know Toa Philly had one because he got my parlay in that first week.
I don't have that right in front of me, Jason. But
I think it was like four. I think it was like five of those in the first game. So it's like,
but they're only averaging maybe 3 explosive plays in either run or pass per game. Okay, so it's very tempting to say, look, you can exploit them, you can get after the quarterback, you can make them pay. Yes,
but do it with 4.
Ding, ding, ding. That's it. Now that you've got Kamon Rucker back healthy, okay, we know what Bo Atkinson can do. There's no reason to dedicate more people to rushing the passer than you need to. You can stop the run, right, as you normally would. Don't get too aggressive rushing the passer. Let your front four do the job. Make Florida State hit on some of these big plays. Because if you make them, you go back to Gene Chizik, right? Make them work their way down the field, Florida State is going to trip all over themselves for reasons that Jason's already laid out.
Yeah.
What you don't want to do is allow the explosive plays.
Think about this like you're playing against a guy who has been absolutely ice cold as a jump shooter from the field. Like he is 0 for, let's say 1 for 64 of his last 64 3-point shots. The worst thing you can do is say, I'm just gonna take away the outside shot. Right? Like you still play him, right? I mean, he's hit shots in the past. Like the guy, like this is a bad cold streak. Something's wrong. Maybe he's got a broken hand. I don't know. Something's really wrong. But the worst thing you can do is overplay the outside shot and give him lanes to the basket so that you can send him to the free throw line, give him layups, dunks, whatever. No, don't do that. You force him to make some jump shots.
Yep.
And okay, look, he just hit 2 out of his first 3 3-pointers. All right. So maybe something's a little bit fixed. But you know what? I'm still making him shoot that 4th one.
Make you prove it.
Yeah, that's kind of where Florida State is right now, where the thing is, they've been so bad up front that teams have gotten that 44.2 pressure rate against them with a 29% blitz rate. Teams are not having to blitz them to get that pressure. They're just getting pressure. I mean, the Duke game, at the end of the Duke game, Florida State's trying to drive late and gave up a sack on the last drive as they're trying to move the field. They had a 6-man protection, and Duke broke that 6-man protection in about 2 seconds with a 3-man rush. They rushed 3, and they got a sack. That's been Florida State's season. And, this is a game where you force Florida State to execute, because they have not done that at all on offense. And offensively, for North Carolina, there is no reason to come in and try to... You're not coming in. The magic number here, you're not trying to score 35 points. The thing you cannot let happen is your quarterback throw a pick 6, and now Florida State has just scored as many points on defense as they've scored on offense in some of their games. Florida State's about as likely to score on defense or special teams in this game as they are on offense. You laugh, but in terms of special teams, they're a top 5 special teams unit in the country. They're really good. I mean, they've returned a kick for a touchdown. The one thing they don't have is a punt returner that really scares you, but they've got maybe the best punter and punt coverage team in the country. I mean, he's a candidate for the Ray Guy Award. They've got a kicker who's about as good as anybody right now. So they're really good on special teams, and defensively, they do produce some pressure up front. They've managed to be pretty good in terms of pass rush, not as good as people thought they'd be coming into the year, but they're capable of generating enough problems on defense that they can score. If you're North Carolina, priority number 1, end every drive with a kick. No turnovers. This is a conservative game plan. Turn and hand it off to your tailbacks 35, 40 times a game, because even if you punt, you don't expect them to score. Mm-hmm. And if you get the ball back, just keep handing it to Hampton, and even against a good defense, eventually Hampton's going to pop one. That's the way you think about this. So this is a conservative game plan for me offensively. Now, I have some wrinkles in there and all of that. You always have some shot plays and all, but this is not one where you come out and try to throw it all over the yard, because that reduces your chance of winning, because they're as likely to score on defense as they are on offense right now. Now, I say that, but they've only forced 3 turnovers all season also. So defensively, they've been, actually 2 weeks ago, David Hale did one of his legendary comparisons, Team A, Team B, like he does on Twitter, which I love. And Florida State and Clemson's defensive stats were almost identical, except for one. Clemson has forced like 23 turnovers and Florida State's forced 3 on the season. They're allergic to forcing turnovers, but they've got enough talent on the back end that could change. And so you've got to be careful about that. And you're basically, this game you've got to treat like a race to 24.
Preston from Greensboro, living like every Carolina fan listening to this. I feel like we've done this show before over the last 6 years when it was a slam dunk. I feel like we've done it against the Florida State team. But let me talk about Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com first.
Woo!
We're going to get into predictions and a little bit more on the offensive side. But you've got the opportunity to go to Franklin Street and go to one of the classic stores that has been there forever. If you haven't been to Frank Street in a long time, you probably won't recognize it, but you will recognize Johnny T-shirt because they've been in the same spot at least since I was in school and before, and they always had the great customer service, the great content. They've got all the swag you could ever need if you're a Carolina person. The white throwbacks are back on the football team today. I think they're wearing white pants too. Could be wrong. But you got white throwbacks there. You've got all the basketball stuff you need and all the other sports and schools of business and all that kind of stuff at Johnny T-shirt. And if you can't get there, go to johnnytshirt.com. 10% off your order if you are an Inside Carolina Premium subscriber. Give them the code to hook you up, either online or in person. National guys are going to pay the bills. It's the game plan, Florida State and Carolina and Tallahassee. All right, Greg, let me get back to you here on the game plan. Of course, Greg and Barnes in the middle. If you're watching on YouTube, Staples over there on the right. I guess that's how it's set up. I'm on your left. Greg, it felt like Jason was getting his unconquered monologue in there on the entire game, but I don't disagree with anything he's saying. I do find it interesting. You mentioned special teams, Jason, and I want to drop this stat because I've never seen it. Florida State on the season, punt return yardage, what is it?
It's negative, isn't it?
It's -7.
Yep.
And so to your point, end every possession on a kick, and just as long as McGinnis can get it off, they ain't returning it. But, Greg, your take on Carolina's approach on the offensive side of the ball as well.
Well, let me start here. In terms of, you look at F+, which is the combination of FEI, which is per possession scoring advantage adjusted for opponent, and then Bill Connolly's SP+, which is more efficiency, explosiveness based. FSU ranks #1 nationally in special teams, which is quite impressive. And then North Carolina has had a pretty good year, but Carolina is still 45th. So there's an advantage there. And then Jason hit on the other aspect that I think is very important in this game. North Carolina beat Duke or lost to Duke by 1, and they were even in turnover margin. Florida State lost to Duke by 7, and were -4 in turnover margin. They lost to Clemson, which Clemson's going to be playing for the ACC championship. Lost by 2 scores, 29-13, and they lost that turnover margin by 1. So 2 parts to that. Number one, Florida State has not won the turnover margin in any game this year. They've only tied 3 times, and they've lost it 5 times. But when they have a even turnover margin, they can play with you, and they can be competitive. And even when they've lost turnover margin, they're pretty stout because of special teams and because of the defense. And that's where we get to the point of saying, okay, Carolina, if they win turnover margin by a few, well, this can kind of get out of hand. But if they don't, and that turnover margin's even, now we're talking about a very competitive game, and that's where you kind of get the 2.5 point spread. That makes sense. So there's a lot that goes into this game, but it's kind of a high-level approach where it's very much, and Jason hit on this, it's very much a team concept in your game plan. It's see if Florida State can beat you offensively without being too aggressive, and on the flip side, do what you do well. And that's give it to Amari and Hampton. I mean, Jason showed a video this week, broke it down, and the reason that North Carolina picked up a first down, it was okay scheme. Amari and Hampton just ran over somebody. And not just ran over a guy, trucked him. And Hampton, I don't know what the percentage is. It's about 75% of his yards have come after contact. Give the kid the ball. This is the kind of game where if you're smart defensively and you prevent the big play, and then you really rely on your star running back, you got to feel good about your chances to win. And just don't make any mistakes with turnovers on offense or, get a punt blocked or whatever it may be. So from, a holistic team concept wise, This is very much complimentary football, more so than probably any game that Carolina's played this year.
I agree there. Florida State's recovered one fumble on the season, had 2 interceptions. So just don't be careless. I feel like, was it Florida State game in Tallahassee? Sam Howell had a pick 6 to a defensive end several years ago, and that sort of got Florida State rolling. Jason, final thoughts on the game plan itself. Mark Williams' comment in the chat is money. I feel like I'm being set up. You're giving me hope, which, as I know, Tommy knows, is the real problem. I've always said it's not the despair that gets you, it's the hope. Last thoughts on the game plan here itself, Jason, going in.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mark is right that this is absolutely a Florida State team that if the switch flips in some way this week, if somehow they find their way out of first gear or out of park on offense, if they find first and second gear somehow, that's a dangerous football team. If they force a turnover or two, and if they get some hope to where the momentum starts to go their way, it's a dangerous team. I mean, you got a wide receiver out there who runs 10-4 in the 100 meters. He's had some opportunities against Duke. He had a little in route down around the 20-yard line where if he scores it, he walks in, dropped it. If he catches that ball against Carolina, he scores. The question is, are they at some point going to find that switch? I haven't seen any indication from Florida State that they will, but the thing is, you look at that roster, you look at what they do, it's possible. The other thing, though, that I want to highlight before we move into predictions and all of that is Florida State's run defense has actually been their real Achilles heel on the defensive side, along with their inability to force turnovers. And those two things do tend to go together. You tend to force turnovers when you force 3rd and long. You force more bad leverage plays for the offense, and you wind up getting opportunities. So against what CFB stats still has it as Power 5, but we'll just say Power 3 competition, Florida State's run defense is 72nd in the country, giving up 4.7 yards per carry. So, Greg, you mentioned earlier in the show that this is strength versus strength, weakness versus weakness, and I think by that you meant offense, North Carolina's offense versus Florida State's defense, North Carolina's defense against Florida State's offense. But here's the thing. In terms of North Carolina's offense and what they do well, and what Florida State's defense does best, it's not exactly that. Because what North Carolina does best on offense is run the football with Omari and Hampton and behind that enormous offensive line, right? That's what they do best. What Florida State has struggled to do, and that's against Georgia Tech, against Boston College, against Miami of Florida, who ran for almost, they ran for about 250 yards, against Clemson, over and over again, all these teams, Duke, they have struggled to stop the run. They've not stopped the run on first down. They've not been able to hold up. They've been very good, though, at big play avoidance on defense. They don't give up a lot of big plays. They'll give up a bunch of 6-7 yard runs. When they arrive as tacklers, they tend to go backwards. They do not tend to knock the ball carrier forward, right? Or knock the ball carrier back. So that holds up well for North Carolina's strength. If that pattern holds. Where Florida State is best, if their defensive ends and their defensive tackles get opportunities to rush the passer, I think North Carolina is going to have a very hard time blocking them. If it does get into 3rd and 9 or whatever, this is a run-the-draw kind of game. Because I don't think North Carolina's tackles can block Florida State's ends. They will speed rush those tackles to death. And I think they're going to have trouble blocking those defensive tackles in the pass rush across the board on the interior. This is a tough matchup against Florida State's defensive line when they're pass rushing. The key for North Carolina, look at that 4.7 yards per rush given up by that defense so far this year, and you hope that they continue to have some trouble there. That's the key. That's the thing. And if Carolina can lean into that strength versus weakness and win there, then Florida State's strength, which is pass defense, and their secondary is really good. Their safety position is iffy, but their corners are very good. There's not going to be a bunch of opportunities downfield for North Carolina in the passing game, and it's dangerous. I mean, they will strip sack. They will do those sorts of things against this offensive line if you give them chances. So that's just critical. First down success, second down success in the running game, I think probably determines this football game.
Tommy, to build on that a little bit, Florida State has been solid enough against the run on second and third down. Where teams have really exploited them has been on first down. FSU is allowing 5.5 yards per carry on first down, over 800 yards. And so that there is one of the conversation points of do not get cute offensively. I mean, we know that Chip Lindsey is going to take the balanced approach. But we've also seen Chip, when things are clicking and things are rolling, he does a few things that kind of make you scratch your head. And I think this is a game where you need to avoid that. Don't get cute. Stick with what's working for you. And I think Jason's exactly right, where you can have some success and you can really just lean on Hampton and hopefully the other running backs to kind of lead the way here.
Yeah, and one of the things that's I've been baffled by is Florida State's unwillingness to put 8 in the box or 7 in the box against 3 wide type looks or whatever. They base out of a cover 7 scheme, which is the modern coverage. It's what everybody kind of bases out of, which is the quarters family match read coverage system. And yeah, you've got a lot of advantages and flexibility built into that, where your safeties are going to come down in secondary run support against certain run looks and all that. There's a lot of advantages to that if your safeties are really good at that. Florida State safeties have not been. And they haven't tackled very well when they have been. And it's one of those where you got to think, like, go bigger and just, single cover with your receivers more and just play man free a little bit more, do some of those things. But they haven't done as much of that on first down. They've stuck with their base, and they've just kept getting gashed.
It is. We're going to end up going close to an hour. How about that? It's amazing how we talk about. We're getting out of here early, but we're going to talk about congruity before we get to the prediction. So I'm going to go prediction sponsored by Congruity. I predict that if you email matt@congruityhr.com, you can get your free assessment if you're an Inside Carolina person, and they will help your small to mid-sized business grow exponentially. They started locally, and then they're a national brand because Darren and Matt and the customer service and the technology that they use to support your business and handle all the heavy lifting is unmatched. Check out matt@congruityhr.com/Tar Heels and get that assessment. 2 great sponsors, Congruity and Johnny T-shirt. All right. Has everybody written their predictions down? I've got mine down.
I have not, but I'll go first. So I don't have.
All right. Greg Barnes is up first.
So I think this is the game that North Carolina has to win if they want to get to and I think the fact that they had some success in Charlottesville last weekend bodes well. I think they have a little bit of confidence. They understand kind of what they can do defensively. Now that Rutgers back at full health, I think that's beneficial. And because of that, I've got North Carolina winning this game 24-17.
24-17. I'll go, Jason, so I can get mine in first. I think it's going to be a little higher scoring than people think, which is totally anti to any stats that I've read. And I think Florida State breaks the barrier, right? But they still lose. 33-26, Carolina gets it done in Tallahassee for Mack Brown's first win against his alma mater. In a game, to Greg's point, they've got to have to be able to get to a bowl game if they want to have the season end somewhere other than Keenan Stadium against NC State. What you got, Jason?
Yeah, I see the comment from Sean Crowley that I mean, it's kind of accurate and kind of how I feel in some sense that, I'm kind of like Kirk Herbstreit here, that I can't predict this game due to conflict or whatever. But no, the interesting thing here is I'm familiar with both teams, and I feel like both teams have a little bit of Jekyll and Hyde in them, but I've only seen one of the characters from one of those teams. So the question is, does Dr. Jekyll ever come out for Florida State this season? Because I think it's potentially in there. I just haven't seen him. So, that's the interesting thing. I have very little confidence actually in my prediction because of how little confidence I have in anything that Florida State does right now. But that lack of confidence is why I am predicting a North Carolina win. North Carolina 19, Florida State 16 in this game. I do think that this is going to be Greg Barnes style football, but not of the pretty variety. This will be of the lower scoring, run the football variety, because neither team is really a threat to do as much offensively. Like I said, this is one of my lowest confidence projections of the season, which you wouldn't expect from two teams that I know the best. But I do think that, Florida State is one of those teams where I went through and charted it. If they catch 2 balls per week, basically, that they've dropped, this team's probably 5-2 or 4-3. That's how close they've been, and against a good schedule. So you'd think, okay, well, eventually regress to the mean, right? But after 8 games, maybe that is the mean. Maybe they just aren't that team, and that's what I'm going to bet on that until they show otherwise. So I'm going to go with Carolina winning 19-16. I don't think there's a lot of yards or points in this game, but should be a fun one for people who want to watch a lot of running the football.
Turnover battle is huge in this one. Carolina protects it, does like we've talked about, give it to Hampton, and wrap up on defense. I think they get it done. I just got a feeling it's going to be one of those higher scoring games. You've been listening to the Game Plan podcast. We are going to get out of here in less than an hour. No golf segment tonight, even though it is still beautiful out there on golf courses. I mean, what world we live in when it's 85 degrees on Halloween here in North Carolina, just crazy times. That's Jason Staples. That's Greg Barnes, Congruity, and Johnny T-Shirt. Shout out to the 150 or so that have been here most all night watching us. Everybody stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Stay tuned for Inside Carolina Live on Saturday ahead of North Carolina and Florida State. Thanks, everybody.